Hey, and welcome back to the Disruption Spiral. This is a four-part mini-series where I break down what happens when disruption hits mission-driven organizations. If you're a leader in a nonprofit organization, in an NGO, a higher education institute, a healthcare company, or really any organization where the mission is what brings people to the work, this is a series for you. And especially if you have responsibilities for leading others through change, I think this model and this information is going to be very helpful for you as you continue to lead others through what is a very disruptive environment. This is episode 4. This is the last episode. And today we're going to be focusing on the third tendency, which is over sacrificing. I'll tell you a little bit about what it is, why it emerges, give you an example, and then tell you what you can do to start reversing this tendency. This is the one that I call the mission-driven accelerant. You can see this purple line that's going down the spiral. And I'll tell you why this exacerbates the downward spiral toward dysfunction. I imagine most of you can intuitively understand probably what I mean by over-sacrificing. This is the tendency to overextend oneself in ways that are unsustainable and ultimately detrimental to yourself, to your team, and to your organization. Now, if you're in a mission-driven organization right now, odds are you have seen this around you, you currently see this around you, perhaps you are recognizing that you are over-sacrificing. How do you know it exists within the organization? Well, often we'll look for burnout rates, we'll look for high turnover. You'll hear complaints about a lack of free time or other ways in which the work is consuming the people in the organization. When I'm talking to leaders, often I'll be listening for phrases like, I don't know how long I can keep this up, right? All of these are indicators that there is a tendency emerging for over sacrifice. Now, again, we're talking about disruption. And as you can imagine, this tendency is very natural to emerge in disruption. Again, as we've talked about, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in because a disruption is registered as a threat, right? Many of us come to mission driven work because we care deeply, deeply about the mission that we're serving. Many times the mission is directly impacting the lives of others, right? So this is a very natural tendency to emerge when there's a disruption that changes our system, our process, right? We take on more than we can actually do sustainably. An example where this often comes up is when an organization undergoes forced restructuring or layoffs. Of course, this happens because when you lose team members, whether they're laid off or they're moved around the organization, right, or people leave on their own volition, there are responsibilities that need to be covered. And often they need to be covered because there's a system in place, right, that requires that somebody fulfill those responsibilities. And if we're going to continue serving the mission, sometimes the easiest thing for a leader to do is to say, I will make sure that they happen. So they take on more of the responsibilities of the person that left or moved on. And often there are emotional consequences for the layoffs or for the turnover. And the leader has to navigate through the weight of the emotional response as well. So they take on more, they push through, often in ways that just mask some of the weight, and they lead to more and more action, more responsibility, and leading to an unsustainable over-sacrificing tendency. Now, I want to just name something here that I'm sure many of you are thinking, which is what is the line between taking on what I should take on, what's right for me to take on as a leader, and what might be over-sacrificing? And here's what I always like to say to leaders who ask that question, which is what you're doing, is there a plan for it to be a short-term process, or is it indefinite? And I think this is really important because when our sympathetic nervous system is kicked into gear, we don't typically think medium to long term. Our time horizon is shortened. So we think just short term, how do we survive this? And we're not thinking very strategically. And many times leaders will take on additional responsibilities without clarity around what the plan is in the medium and long term. So often, as leaders in mission driven organizations, we have to take on more to navigate the short term response to disruption. And I don't want to sit here and pretend like that's not a reality of the organizations that we lead in. And what's important is that we bring in the medium and long term perspective and make sure that we are not absorbing more than we can sustain in the medium and long term. So we have to be explicit about what it is that we're taking on and for how long that we're going to take it on, and what is the plan in once we get through the immediate disruption, right? What's the plan medium and long term, and how do we get support for that going forward? So how do we reverse this tendency for over sacrificing? One, I have to say, this is potentially one of the most difficult, or the one that brings the most tension for leaders, because often over sacrificing is not only supported within the organization, but even glorified within the organization, whether explicitly or implicitly. So often this can bring some friction when we start to push back against over sacrificing. The first thing that I always advise leaders who are looking at reversing this pattern is you have to support renewal activities for yourself and for your teams. And what I mean by renewal here, I'm not talking about sort of classic self-care, have a glass of wine on the couch and watch a movie, right? That's not really a renewal activity. We need something that will help our nervous system to calm and help us to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which will allow us to recover from this sympathetic nervous system action. And the research being done by one of my professors, Richard Boyatzis, has indicated that the way that we do this is we try to inspire 3 different emotions or feelings or states. Those 3 are mindfulness, hope, and compassion. And those have been proven neurophysiologically to help us to reset. So when I'm working with leaders, first I say, how can we access mindfulness, hope, and or compassion at this moment? Maybe it's petting your dear puppy that elicits compassion for you. Maybe it's talking to a loved one about things that you're hopeful about. Maybe it's meditation or yoga practice, or a walk in nature, right, that helps you to access mindfulness. Those 3 will actually help us, our nervous systems, to reset. That will then allow us to access some of these more strategic actions that we can do to combat over sacrificing. Next, again, we talked about time horizon, but making sure that we're thinking not only short term, but medium and long term. So sometimes we have disruptions that force us to think short term, and we think, are we even going to survive this? We have to bring in some assumption that we will, so that we can bring in a perspective for medium and long term thinking. And often this is where it helps to bring someone else in that can help us to think about that time horizon. Next, and this is very important, we need to think about where and how we can set and hold boundaries from your position in the organization. And when we're working on boundaries, what I will tell my clients is that you have to expect friction. You have to expect pushback. Where can we start experimenting with boundaries that are low stakes, so you can feel that friction, feel the tension that comes with that, and start to reorient the relationship with you and the system? That might be with individuals in your organization. It might be with the collective, with your team, with the organization, right? But there will be tension when you introduce boundaries and hold them when they were not there in the first place, right? I like to use this example of a rubber band here. where if we imagine this finger here with my ring finger hand is the organization and this is you, right? Without knowing it, often if the organization is, if we're primed to over sacrifice, we move when the organization moves, right? So the organization says, or the mission says, we need people to respond. We move with the organization, right? We have to realize that actually we have quite a bit of flexibility here for us to decide how we respond rather than react. So if the organization says, hey, we need to move this way immediately, what's our capacity here to stretch this band? To give ourselves some agency to say, okay, actually, here's a boundary that I'm going to assert, and I'm actually not going to move directly with you, but I'm going to sit here for a little bit and feel some of the tension and the discomfort that comes with that. But this is the agency. This is us bringing back agency for ourselves, right? And as you notice here, once we start flexing this rubber band, we realize we actually have all different kinds of opportunities to respond to what the mission asks of us, right? So this is bringing back flexibility in how we respond rather than react is the work of setting and holding boundaries and exploring some of these different opportunities for responsiveness rather than just seeing the organization need something and reacting to that. This also is an indication, the more flexibility you have here, the better an indicator, the better the indicator that we are not in that sympathetic nervous system overdrive that often has us reacting and responding to wherever the organization wants us to be. Lastly, I think this is also very important. There's lots of research out there that shows that when we're under sustained stress and sympathetic nervous system overdrive, that our leadership effectiveness plummets. We're less able to access critical thinking, strategic planning capacities, right? We're less likely to think strategically when we're in the sympathetic nervous system overdrive. So if you're in an organization where data is very important, where research is very important, there's a lot of good research out there that would support the case for setting and holding boundaries and ultimately for reversing this tendency of over-sacrificing. Lastly, I'll mention this too. I mentioned this in the other episodes. It's always helpful to bring an external perspective. This is often where I'm coaching leaders. I can be the person that helps them to better regulate their sympathetic nervous system, to look for opportunities to practice boundary setting and holding, and to ultimately gather information from their experiments to figure out, hey, is this a place where we can continue to hold a boundary? Do we need flexible boundaries here and harder boundaries here, right? That experimentation really helps when you have someone that can help you to identify opportunities and support you in the accountability and the information gathering from your experiments. Now, again, I mentioned I would just talk quickly about how these tendencies interact. And over-sacrificing, what it does is it really exacerbates this sympathetic nervous system overdrive, right? So, as you can imagine, the more we overextend ourselves, the more likely we are to stay in this place. And this is why it's an accelerant for the downward spiral, in that it actually primes us to be more problem focused, to be more likely to attribute those problems to individuals rather than the complexities of the system, right? And when we have more problems like that and they're being individualized, we have a tendency to take on more. So you can see why this is a spiral and why, quite honestly, it can be very difficult to extract yourself from, especially if you don't know what's happening. My hope is that with this series, you're now better able to see some of the patterns that emerge in your organization. You can identify some of these tendencies that result from disruption, and you can choose something different, right? Bringing awareness to the pattern is step one. Then step two is experimenting, trying different things. How can we support ourselves to not fall into these natural tendencies resulting from the sympathetic nervous system and try something different? Thanks for tuning in. I hope it's been helpful. If you have questions or anything else you want to talk about, please send me an email. I'll put my information down in the description in the video. And I wish you all the best in navigating what continues to be a disruptive environment and to continue working toward the great missions that you're working on. Take care, everyone. Thanks.